Alright, so just a heads up, I am back from Cannes this week. I lost my voice for 2 whole days while I was there, and it's still not entirely back. So I want to apologize if I sound a little off this week, but I am trying my best. This one may also be a bit of a quick one, bit of a dirty one, but hopefully it'll be good, and hopefully you'll enjoy. Cheers! May saw the release of Furiosa, the latest film from director George Miller, the prequel to Mad Max Fury Road, and only a slight exaggeration of day-to-day life in Australia. And look, it's great to see Bradley Cooper's nose from Maestro still getting work. As with the other entries in the Mad Max franchise, Furiosa is in effect an apocalyptic road movie. It's a film about the end of the world. There is, of course, a long and rich tradition of apocalyptic fiction, and every generation gets the vision of the apocalypse that they deserve, from the man-made nuclear horrors of the Cold War, to the environmental and extraterrestrial acts of God that define turn-of-the-millennium apocalyptic cinema. How we imagine the end of the world isn't just a prediction of the future, it's also a reflection of present anxieties. So, what exactly does Furiosa tell us about the anxieties of the current moment? And how exactly does it differ from the perspective of Fury Road just 9 years ago? This week, we're going to be talking about the big themes and ideas of Furiosa. And there'll be spoilers in so much as we'll also be talking about Fury Road, the film to which it's a prequel. If you haven't seen Furiosa and Fury Road, you should check it out. Not because this video will spoil it, but just because it's really good. So, with that in mind, I think we're good to go. Ladies and gentlemen, now you know what? Even if my throat wasn't like sandpaper, I couldn't pull this off, so I'm going to cue you up. Chris, you mind taking this one?
Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines!
God, I love that nose. Aesthetically, Furiosa is recognizably of a piece with Fury Road. The films share the same hyper-saturated orange and blue color scheme. They feature many of the same characters and actors, although many of those actors are playing different roles. While the continuity of the larger Mad Max franchise has the elasticity of a set of folk tales told around a campfire, Furiosa and Fury Road neatly overlap, with Furiosa depicting the origin story of the heroine featured in Fury Road. However, thematically, tonally, and narratively, the two works are very different from one another. Fury Road is largely comprised of a single extended chase sequence over a fairly compressed time frame, lasting about a couple of days. In contrast, Furiosa unfolds over literal decades, following its hero from her childhood in the place of abundance to mere moments before the events of Fury Road begin. This shift is also reflected in the movie's visual language, with husband and wife team of director George Miller and editor Margaret Sixel favoring longer takes, slow fades, overlays, and even time-lapse photography in Furiosa, to give a greater sense of the passage of time. Furiosa is, in the grand mythological sense, an epic.
Do you have it in you to make it epic?
It is also, to quote the film's unenviable SEO-inflected subtitle, a saga. However, it also presents an interesting vision of the apocalypse. In most traditional apocalyptic fiction, the narrative is neatly broken down into pre- and post-apocalyptic segments. Films and television shows will often cut from a prelude or a teaser or even a credit sequence to the aftermath of the end of civilization, as characters navigate the remains of a world that has collapsed into itself. In these stories, there was typically a before and an after, a then and a now. In the post-apocalyptic genre, there's often a sense of lawlessness and chaos. These are often ruggedly individualist tales, studies of individuals struggling to survive in a world where everything is hostile. Or, Australia. Traditionally, if there are larger societal structures, they tend to be either savage tribes or fascist dictatorships. Attempts to re-establish or rebuild civilization exist as either abstract paradises or doomed experiments, aspirational ideals for the hero, or tragic failures waiting to happen. What's interesting about Furiosa is the way in which Miller seems largely disinterested in constructing a rugged, individualist apocalyptic parable. Sure, the film is named for its protagonist, but she's a curiously passive figure. Anya Taylor-Joy, the movie's credited lead, doesn't appear until an hour into the runtime. While Furiosa spends the entire movie motivated by her desire to return to the place of abundance and to avenge herself upon Dementus, the audience knows from Fury Road that Furiosa can never get home, and Dementus himself points out the folly of any revenge upon him. Instead, Miller is much more interested in the systems and functions of the post-apocalyptic hellscape that he has dubbed the Wasteland. Fury Road cleverly suggested a complicated and dense internal mythology for this nightmare world, populated by figures like the Doof Warrior and the People Eater, along with locations like the Bullet Farm or Gastown. However, Furiosa is very interested in exploring the mechanics of this mythology. Despite all the road-borne chaos, Furiosa suggests that this world exists in something approaching equilibrium. Immortan Joe runs the Citadel, where access to an underground spring allows him to farm crops and run industry. He can trade food and water for petroleum at Gastown and for weapons with the Bullet Farm. The leaders of those communities are tightly integrated. The Bullet Farmer spends a lot of time at the Citadel, and the leader of Gastown refers to Immortan Joe as brother. Obviously, and this probably doesn't need to be said in a movie that involves a character called the People Eater, life is not great for the actual inhabitants of these communities, the starving and wretched masses who live off the scraps from those in power. However, the people operating the Citadel, Gastown, and the Bullet Farm live lives of luxury, very much at odds with the standard logic of these sorts of stories. Furiosa is fascinated by the mechanics, economics, and politics that operate to keep the system stable, even as the world itself dies and humanity itself seems to stumble towards extinction. It's perhaps a bit obvious to say that the Mad Max movies have always been about cars. However, Furiosa is obsessed with the mechanics of such vehicles. Dementus, for example, is introduced studying a classic motorbike engine. The construction of Immortan Joe's first war rig is a major plot point. Cars and motorbikes are frequently stripped for parts, disassembled and reassembled in real time. It's often stressed that engines can keep running even on scavenged parts. In the world of both Fury Road and Furiosa, human beings are ultimately just fuel for these inhuman machines, resources to be exploited. Dementus, and later Immortan Joe's doctor, is known as the Organic Mechanic. Captured wasteland wanderers are used as blood bags. Dementus survives for years off blood sausage harvested from his young surrogate daughter Furiosa. Piss boys feed their urine into the engine as a cooling mechanism. Milkers provide milk that can be bartered for bullets and gas. In the maggot hole, dead bodies serve as meat. The People Eater is perhaps both a literal and a metaphorical title. In such a world, it's hard to tell where people end and machines begin. In Furiosa, flesh is torn and severed by these inhuman machines. A gang leader is drawn and quartered by motorbikes. Furiosa's arm is crushed by a big rig wheel. Bodies are crushed as steel is compacted. Furiosa will replace her lost arm with a mechanical substitute. Stray dogs wander through the Bullet Farm. They carry human limbs in their mouths and limp on metal replacements for their own lost legs. Hell, at one point Miller seems to do an homage to Park Chan-wook's Old Boy, except, instead of a guy eating an octopus, it's a gigantic truck eating a flying motorbike. God, I love these movies. This is a world in which humanity is struggling to survive and remain viable, but larger systems lumber on. Immortan Joe maintains a set of highways connecting the three fortresses of the wasteland, and Dementus is capable of tarring his own road through the desert. Indeed, the villain of Furiosa, Dementus, is so dangerous because he represents a threat to even this broken system. Dementus appeals to the oppressed and the suffering, promising to fight with them against the big shots who oppress them.
Bring me your leaders and throw them down. You will rule with me in the splendor of a new wasteland.
He is in this sense a sort of vulgar populist, a figure recognizable in contemporary politics.
We take Gotham from the corrupt and we give it back to you, the people.
The irony, of course, is that Dementus is right that the system is broken and built upon the exploitation of the poor and the needy. But all Dementus can ultimately do is break it even more catastrophically. In Furiosa, the choice is between the perpetuation of a fundamentally broken and decaying system or complete anarchy. And quick sidebar here, one of the more interesting aspects of Furiosa is the idea that Dementus is actually not just a mirror for Furiosa herself, but for Mad Max, the protagonist of the saga to this point. What little we learn about Dementus' past reveals that he's lost his own family, and has been transformed by the experience. He's become a wanderer, drifting through the wasteland. He's adopted a found family. However, while Max's journey is ultimately towards embracing hope, Dementus has accepted nihilism. And look, not to put too fine a point on it, but also this end sidebar. This contrast between a fundamentally broken and decaying system and complete anarchy is interesting because it presents a somewhat different worldview than Fury Road. In that film, our heroes are able to rally together to journey back to the Citadel and to vanquish Immortan Joe. The closing moments of the movie find Furiosa being raised up to the Citadel as a liberator, having vanquished and overthrown a dictator. Of course, it's worth acknowledging that Miller himself has a somewhat cynical reading of this ending, believing that it's entirely possible that Furiosa may become a tyrant.
Following history and following storytelling, what tends to happen, and this is from Joseph Campbell, who is significant. Campbell said that the usual story is that today's hero becomes tomorrow's tyrant. I believe that whatever motivated Furiosa to do this thing came from a really brave and courageous space, and I think that's presented in the movie. But back in the Citadel, she could also turn the other way.
That said, Miller also does acknowledge that Furiosa may be shrewd enough to avoid such potential pitfalls. So who knows? But still, in the moment, the ending is triumphant. The audience is clearly meant to cheer Furiosa and to believe that things can and will be better. In this way, Fury Road was a very 2015 movie. It was all righteous anger and earnest allyship, a narrative rooted in the idea that a fallen world might yet be redeemed through the realization that human beings in general, and women in particular, are not things. In its own weird way, even amid the apocalyptic wasteland, Fury Road felt like the last gasp of a certain kind of Obama-era optimism, typified by the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie, but which was running on empty by the time of Star Trek Beyond. In contrast, Furiosa feels like a very post-2016, and especially post-2020, take on these same basic ideas. Furiosa is less a post-apocalyptic movie than it is a mid-apocalyptic movie. It's a film about how the zombie corpse of the status quo shuffles on, even as the world dies around it. There is no simple on-off switch for the apocalypse here. No smash cut from Emma Thompson boasting about the efficacy of her new cancer treatment to an abandoned and overgrown New York. Instead, the world dies by inches. To be fair, this is not a unique understanding of the apocalypse. If anything, Furiosa is an interesting companion to the very first Mad Max movie, in which Max, not yet mad, is a police officer trying to maintain order as the world collapses around him. That was also a mid-apocalyptic movie, a film about how the end of the world could be happening in real time just outside the audience's window. This approach was particularly common in the late 1970s and into the 1980s. Most obviously, consider the nightmarish apocalyptic visions of New York presented in science fiction cinema, and how they weren't too far removed from more ostensibly grounded contemporary dramas or comedies from around the same time. Incidentally, there's a lot of nostalgia for that 1970s end-of-the-world vibe in contemporary cinema. Still, Furiosa feels like a timely depiction of the end of the world. It feels informed by the recent global pandemic, which demonstrated that even something of that scale and magnitude could not stop, or even particularly slow, the systems that shaped the modern world. It's an increasingly popular depiction of the apocalypse in contemporary pop culture, as Mark Fisher explains in the opening chapter of his book, Capitalist Realism. Fisher is talking specifically about Alfonso Cuarón's Children of Men, but he could just as easily be talking about any number of other recent movies.
The catastrophe in Children of Men is neither waiting down the road, nor has it already happened. Rather, it is being lived through. There is no punctual moment of disaster. The world doesn't end with a bang. It winks out, unravels, gradually falls apart. What caused the catastrophe to occur? Who knows? Its cause lies long in the past, so absolutely detached from the present as to seem like the caprice of a malign being. Children of Men connects with the suspicion that the end has already come, the thought that it could well be the case that the future harbors only reiteration and re-permutation. Watching Children of Men, we are inevitably reminded of the phrase attributed to Fredric Jameson and Slavoj Žižek, that it is easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism.
This is a sentiment that simmers through a lot of contemporary pop culture. A sense that the end of the world is not a singular defining event, but something that happens as life continues around it in some strange state of denial. This year, for example, in Alex Garland's Civil War, a collapsing United States looks surprisingly like the one audience members will see outside the cinema.
Are you guys aware there's like a pretty huge civil war going on all across America?
Oh, sure, but we just try to stay out. With what we see on the news, seems like it's for the best.
In Marvel's Loki, for example, reality itself may be unraveling, but the characters still have to get up to go to work in the morning.
Do you think you'll be in tomorrow, though?
Yeah.
Cool.
This taps into a very modern set of social anxieties. In March 2020, in the earlier stages of the pandemic, nearly 3 in 10 Americans believed that the world would end in their lifetime. By December 2022, about 4 in 10 Americans believed that they were living in the end times. Academics who study such things argue that discussion of the inevitability of the apocalypse has become increasingly mainstream in recent years. Hell, the idea that the apocalypse is literally happening right now even pops up in contexts quite removed from the traditional apocalyptic imagery.
I don't know what's happening, people. I don't know. But it's pretty clear the world is ending. I don't want to shock anybody. Seems to be happening, though. I thought we'd get out. I thought we'd make it under the wire. I thought I would, I'm 56, but I don't know. I think we might see it.
You have trouble sleeping?
Why? Why can't you sleep?
I don't know, just everything that's going on in the world.
What do you mean, what's going on?
Oh, I don't know, just like the end of the world.
So it's not that hard to understand why this idea of the apocalypse as something happening in real time that our broken systems somehow shuffle through like zombies has taken root at this precise moment. These films and shows speak to a generation confronted by climate change, the return of global fascism, the largest land war in Europe in 80 years, rampant income inequality, and the lingering aftermath of a devastating global pandemic, among countless other horrors and atrocities happening around the world. And in the face of all that, life seems to continue on as normal. The past couple of years have seen significant declines in life expectancy and standards of living, in many cases for the first time in decades. Parents no longer believe that their children will have a better life than they did. And yet in the face of that, we're confronted with the reality that the rich continue to get richer. And as they face the apocalypse, they prepare to do so inside beautifully decorated bunkers, with all manner of modern amenities, safely insulated from the world that their greed has destroyed. The apocalypse in Furiosa maybe isn't as far removed from the present day as one might hope that it would be. Hell, Immortan Joe's water policies will be familiar to anybody who has lived through any government austerity over the past couple of decades.
Do not, my friends, become addicted to water. It will take hold of you, and you will resent its absence.
As such, the framing of the apocalypse in Furiosa feels very much tied to this particular moment. It presents a world that is fallen and damaged, populated by people who are broken and wounded. Even in the context of the film itself, the audience knows that the place of abundance will not survive more than a few decades. However, in contrast, the great inhuman machines lumber onwards, and the real fight is to retain some humanity in the face of these monstrous machines. Furiosa is a bleak movie. In many ways, it's a much bleaker movie than Fury Road.
Feels like hope.
There is no hope!
Then again, these are bleak times. I've been Dara Mooney, and this was The Backdrop.